Thank you for joining our webinar. We'll make a start now. We have all our guests. So in this webinar, we're going to be discussing human-centered security. And I have three guests who are experts in the field who will be speaking soon. So before we start, a couple of things to say. First of all, we'll be doing a poll in a bit. And then as you're doing the poll, I'll introduce the guests. And then secondly, if you have any questions, some of you have already submitted some questions beforehand. But if you have any further questions, you can use the QA box in the Zoom application to send any of your questions. Okay. So I think the next slide will show you how to do the poll. It should appear on Zoom. And there are sort of three questions that we'd like you to answer. So hopefully you should all be seeing the poll questions now. If you could just answer those. And in the meantime, I'll introduce the guests. Okay, so my first guest is Professor Angela Sasse. Professor Angela is Professor of Human-Centered Security at University Bochum and also a part-time professor at UCL UK. She's a usability researcher by training, and she started investigating the causes and effects of usability issues with security mechanisms in 1996. She's been advocating a new approach for over a decade and has joined OutThink to promote targeted, positive, and self-motivated security awareness. My next guest is Dr. Philip Morgan. Dr. Philip is a reader in cognitive science at Cardiff University and is also an international expert in the areas of cyber psychology, human-machine interface design, human-computer interaction, interruption distraction effects, and transport and intelligent mobility. He's published over 80 papers and reports across these and other areas. Also, at Airbus, Dr. Philip is the technical lead for cyber psychology and human factors group and lead accelerator in human-centric cybersecurity, and oversees multiple projects in areas such as measurement of human cyber strengths, vulnerabilities and behaviors, effective communication of cybersecurity information to humans, methods to overcome maladaptive behaviors, and designing human-machine interfaces to augment cyber-safe thinking and subsequent behaviors and actions. And finally, we have Paul Scharf. Paul serves as a group head of information security for Bunzl PLC, an international FTSE 100 distribution group. Paul has previously been leading security functions for large international retail brands. He's also worked in the financial sector at Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and Schroders Investment Bank, and in telecom at Cisco Systems and Vodafone. Paul holds an MBA from London Business School and an MSc from St. Petersburg State University, and is a member of the ISC2 and is accredited as a Certified Information Systems Practitioner and ISO 2701 lead author. Welcome to my guests. Thank you for joining me today for this webinar. Okay, so before we progress on to asking questions of our guests and for them to present their view on human-centered security, I just wanted to give some context to this webinar. Here at OutThink, we believe organizations need to move beyond just security awareness training, especially if it's just used as a compliance tick box exercise, and they need to start actively managing the people part of security. And this requires a human-centered security approach, or a human-centric security approach. So therefore, what we have done is we've decided to work with industry leaders and academic experts, some of who are obviously on this webinar today, to decide to build out a framework which takes the best of academia has to offer in this area and also combine it with the knowledge and experience of seasoned practitioners. What we hope to achieve at the end of building this framework is a playbook for security practitioners, which will help them get started on the journey to adopting human-centric security approach within their organizations. We appreciate there's a lot of information out there, and we think that something concise and easy to digest is needed in this area. So part of the reason for these webinars, to also introduce you to the human-centric approach, and also to help you, to let you know that we are working towards building something that will help the industry at large. Okay, so now I'd like to move on to my guests and hopefully have them present so a few slides, but also to answer some questions. Okay, so just to also give you context, hopefully when the slide from the results of the polls, we'll present them at the end of the webinar and show you what people have said. And then we'll also ask any questions we have for our guests also at the end of the webinar. So we'll go through our guests presenting, and then at the end we will have an opportunity, or you will have an opportunity to ask any questions. So if you have any burning questions throughout, please do put them in the chat option or the Q&A option, and we will pick those up at the end and ask our guests those questions. Okay, Angela, in your research, you've talked about the need to fit the task to the human. What do you think is stopping organizations from doing this?
I think it's a misconception that you can just mandate security. So that you can basically like write a rule book, hand it down from the mountain, and then and then people will follow it, and that's it. It's basically a failure to realize that you really need to build a feedback loop, and that you very rarely, when you hand things down from a mountain, actually understand exactly what's going on in different parts of the company and why it may not be possible to follow those general rules. So you need a feedback loop to actually understand what can be followed and what can't, and why, and then work with your employees in order to find workable, effective security solutions. I think there's also basically not that recognition that employees very often, when they don't, they don't follow the rules, it's not just because they're difficult or lazy. It's because they are actually trying to protect the company from a different type of loss, and that is the productivity loss. And it's really, we can't, I think companies have been pushing down competing productivity demands and security demands, and expected employees to somehow juggle those two. And that's just not how you actually design work properly. So in a way, what we've been doing is setting users up to manage an impossible task, and then we complain when they fail at doing that impossible task. Next slide, please. So I think the other part is that somehow there's a missing element in how security professionals have been trained, and that is that you very often hear it presented as a trade-off between usability and security, so that if you make something usable, you make it necessarily less secure. And that's actually not true at all. It's not a trade-off, it's a triangle. If you make something super secure, but nobody can use it or doesn't want to use it, then that's just as bad as having a system that's very easy to use but not secure. So we really need to find a balance, and we also need to very much keep the eye on how much time and effort is it taking to do the security, and is that feasible for people in that particular position. Next slide, please. So I think it's really been very much, what are the potential threats? That's been the focus. And then what is the currently agreed standard for managing it. I personally hesitate to use the word best practice because I think it's not very accurate, because what it very often, it's just common practice. You know, it's what everybody else is doing, because we've been not very good at evaluating how good the security measures really are on the work, because we would have noticed then that it's not working in many places. And so you should really always consider who has to use this particular security mechanism. What is the main job? What is the production targets they have? What other security mechanisms do they already use? What other do they have to follow? And fitting the task to the man would mean to make it as efficient as possible, to make security as efficient as possible. Whereas I sometimes get the impression that security people think like the more security people have to do, the better it is for the company, but it's really the other way around, you know. And so when employees face these impossible tasks, they really just end up in a situation where they have to do workarounds. It's not that they feel great about it. Just sometimes they go and manage the security risks in a way that they think is doable, but isn't always the very secure. So we really need to get that feedback in order to work together on finding workable solutions that protect productivity, but also deliver the security that we're looking for. Was there one more slide? Yeah. So I think really the motto really has to be, what we have to learn is in design is, you know, we have to stop wasting people's time and attention. And we do that in all sorts of ways by just piling more security advice on top of existing one without actually decommissioning it, you know, with decommissioning the things that aren't up to date anymore. We're not particularly careful whether we call the same thing by two different terms or use one term to mean a variety of different things. The other part is really to enable, to give people some agency in it. So most security advice is paternalistic, that says just do this, and if you don't do it, then you're being, you know, lazy or stupid or whatever. We really need to point out what we're trying to achieve and why it's good for both the individual and the organization to do the right thing in terms of security. So we really need to develop a positive attitude towards security and a partnership in terms of delivering security in the organization. So that's my summary. Then, you know, sort of end, if there's no trade-off between usability and security, security needs to be usable if we want people to do it. And it's really tailoring all the security measures that we do properly to the context in which it's being used. So we really need to change that both in our heads and the way that we talk about it.
Okay, thank you, Angela. It's really informative. Thank you. I'm going to move swiftly on in the interest of time. So over to you, Phil. So for you, what's your view on how organizations should approach human-centered security? And also, what was the catalyst behind the launch of the Airbus Accelerator? Why did you launch it, and how do you think it will move the industry forward?
Okay, thanks, Shawful. So in relation to the initial question, I'll try and answer that throughout the presentation. I'm a data-driven scientist. I'm a psychologist, a human factors and cognitive scientist by trade. So I think the human-centric cybersecurity challenge needs to be data-driven. You know, we need to gather data within and across organizations. We need to stop assuming that we know what the cyber vulnerabilities and strengths are amongst individuals within organizations. We've got a lot of information on those kind of things from some really, really good literature. But we have to remember that things can change by the minute. People are very, very different. And we need to understand our employees within our organizations better when it comes to cybersecurity strengths and vulnerabilities. So one of my takeaway messages today is going to be try and make sure that you baseline things with your employees. In relation to the second question, and I'll come back to the first question throughout the presentation as well. So the second question was what was the catalyst behind the Airbus human-centric cybersecurity accelerator. So I've got some slides that I'm going to go through to tell you about that, what the accelerator is all about, what we do, and give you an introduction into some of the research topics that we're looking at. So if you could advance the slide, that would be great. Thanks. It was discussed a few years back by a number of folks within Airbus and also with some of our really great colleagues at NCSC, including Kerry J, who I believe has joined us on the call today, that even with the best hardware, software and processes for cybersecurity, optimizing humans, people, the employees, is really, really key. I mean, there's lots of data out there that can often sort of raise eyebrows, can often scare us in some ways. When we see figures that, sort of 85 to 90 to 95% of all cyber breaches have a human cause as part of the causal chain there. People within Airbus working within the Cyber Innovation Hub, namely Dr. Kevin Jones, who's now Airbus CISO and Chief Digital Security Officer as well. Adam Wedgbury, who works in the Cyber Innovation Hub in Newport in the UK, recognized that from an industry perspective, there wasn't really much being done within industries in this area. And what I mean by that is, whilst there's lots of wonderful academic research going on, work by Angela, work by myself, work by other teams, and lots of other people, it seems to be the case that from initial scoping, looking at domain analysis and so on, and looking at the gaps, that there are very, very few industries out there, if any, that have a human-centric cybersecurity team embedded within the organization. So what happened within Airbus? So I think everybody knows Airbus, is an aerospace international giant, but they're also very, very well invested and very, very good at cybersecurity and security in general. So Kevin and the team sought to invest in an ambitious and critical program of research and innovation. So I was approached with my expertise across a number of areas, not just cyber psychology, but also a lot of human factors areas in general, like human-machine interface design, human-computer interaction, automation, human-robot interaction, and so on, to come along and try and roadmap this area to see what is needed. That led to what is now called the Airbus Human-Centric Cybersecurity Accelerator, where we challenge the common industry perception that people are always the weakest link. When I say we challenge that, what I mean by that is we agree that people can be the weakest link. And of course, a lot of the data out there suggests that humans are the weakest link. But what we challenge as a team of psychologists and human factors experts is that it doesn't have to be that bad. Human beings are often accused in the cyber world of being sometimes too risky, sometimes a bit silly, sometimes a bit irrational, making mistakes and so on. And it really doesn't have to be that way, because as human beings, we are fallible, but we're also pretty amazing when it comes to certain aspects like adaptability, thinking outside the box, problem solving and so on. So what we thought is, let's bring well over 100 years of psychological knowledge and knowledge from other areas, and let's see if we can challenge this and actually do some research to show that we can reduce those percentages significantly. So H2CS, as it's abbreviated, is a first of its kind research accelerator within a major global commercial organization, which is Airbus, with over 135,000 employees. So it's a wonderful test bed for us to be working within. And we believe it's a novel approach for the cybersecurity industry. So just taking a quote from Dr. Kevin Jones, Airbus CISO and CDSO. Kevin said back in November 2019, with the right tools and approach, employees can be the strongest link in an organization's cyber defense. At Airbus, we aim to put people-centric thinking at the heart of an organization's security, and are keen to hear from like-minded researchers and organizations interested in getting involved. So that's where I'm just going to emphasize that this is an accelerator. We have a team, but we're very, very keen to collaborate with others in this space as well. And we're already collaborating with OutThink, which is wonderful, and other people involved in OutThink, like Angela and a number of others, but we're keen to hear from more people. So H2CS represents a major research program where we're gaining crucial insights into human-centric approaches that work with and can engage people to improve cybersecurity effectiveness. So if we move to the next slide, I'll give you a flavour of some of the things we're working on. I have to remind myself I shouldn't have moved the slides around yesterday. What I should say next is just to introduce you to the team. I think most of the people are on the call at the moment, so I'm going to ignore myself because I really dislike that picture of myself, but it's the best one that I've got. Within the team, I'm really lucky to have 4 people in the team currently. So Dr. Phoebe Asquith, who's a senior research associate, expertise in neuroscience, human vision, machine learning, and a whole host of other different things. Phoebe brings so much to the team in these areas and specifically works on cybersecurity communications, the communication of cybersecurity information, trust in AI, and lots of other different interesting areas. Then we have Laura Bishop, who's a second-year PhD student, who's focusing on human cyber strengths and vulnerabilities and how we measure those using different frameworks, and then thinking about how we can use nudging systems and various other decision support systems to help employees make the right decisions at the right time within organizations when it comes to cyber. George Raywood Burke is a first-year PhD student. George is looking at maladaptive behaviors that occur even when we have the best training, awareness, and understanding. From the research we conduct, we're human beings, which I said earlier on. We all know that we're human beings. We will still sometimes make mistakes. We'll still sometimes work under time pressure, work when we're stressed, work when we're tired, and sometimes mistakes can still occur. So we need to find out what we can do about that. And we've recently introduced Ryan Gamble to the team as well, who's specifically looking at equality, diversity, and inclusivity within cybersecurity and how we can do better in that space. And there are lots of opportunities for more people to join the team. So if we move on to the next slide, and now I'll give you a flavour of some of the research that we're doing. So we've got a number of different research themes within the accelerator, and I'm just going to briefly summarise 5 of them. Hopefully this will generate some questions at the end of the webinar and beyond. As I mentioned earlier, we're developing frameworks to measure human cyber vulnerabilities, strengths, and behaviours. So when we approach this work, we obviously spent a lot of time reading the literature, lots and lots of literature out there on these different aspects of measures. But one thing that I'm a firm believer in is that even with the best frameworks and measures in the world, when you go into an organization even with 20 employees, doesn't have to be 135,000 employees, there are going to be some things that need to be tweaked when it comes to frameworks in order to optimally investigate cyber strengths, vulnerabilities, and behaviors within that organization. So we're developing frameworks and tools based upon existing measures, but also with the inclusion of some other measures as well. And we hope to tell people about some of those soon. From the findings of the frameworks and also best practice from the literature, including psychology, human factors, neuroscience, many other areas, we're building human-centric tools, methods, and interventions to mitigate the cyber vulnerabilities and harness the cyber strengths that we find from the data that we're getting from the frameworks. Another thing that we're very, very passionate about is that cyber vulnerabilities cannot be optimally tackled through interventions that have short-lasting effects. So things like training, cyber awareness campaigns, and those kind of things, they can be great. They can be great. They can be effective. Sometimes the effects are short-term. That's better than no effect at all. But what we're advocates of is that we sometimes need hard constraints built into our work environment, the computer devices we work with. And that might involve, for example, human-machine interface redesign or design, and adaptive and adaptable systems. And I'll tell you a bit more about that in a bit. But essentially, what I'm saying there is, to give you an example, most of us wouldn't get in a car and drive a car without a seatbelt on. So why are we sometimes sitting in front of computers where a decision support system, for example, could help us to make the right decision at the right time, yet we feel uncomfortable about that. We feel really uncomfortable. We think that we're being controlled. We think that we don't need it. Whereas actually some of these things, are there to help us, just like the seatbelt in the car. We're also measuring and mitigating maladaptive behaviors that result from cognitive pressures. So as I said, even with the best cybersecurity understanding, behavior, knowledge in the world, mistakes can still be made when we're working under pressure. And we need to find out what to do about that. So there's a program of work being done on that. And we need to better understand human interaction with cyber-physical systems, and most definitely how to better communicate cybersecurity information to all, not just CISOs, not just cybersecurity teams, not just security teams, to all employees in the organization. And that will probably mean, well, it will definitely mean that cybersecurity communication information needs to be tailored towards different people so that they can actually understand it, and to begin with, they're actually interested in it. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So just some takeaway messages for everybody on the call today. Some of these things, no doubt you already do, but I definitely recommend, the team would recommend, avoid assuming that cybersecurity vulnerabilities of employees. We know what some of the cybersecurity vulnerabilities are. There's some great literature out there that, you know, it has mapped various vulnerabilities, but don't assume that your workforce are going to have those exact vulnerabilities and cyber strengths. Measure and baseline as much as you can. And through the tools and frameworks that we're developing, tools and frameworks that are being developed by others in the field, including Angela, including OutThink, you know, I'm obviously going to say this, but these are all great measures, a good place to start. And they're not very costly to implement. They don't take much time. Just involves a bit of a culture shift sometimes within the organization. Use optimal human-centric cybersecurity tools, methods, and interventions in order to make some changes, and base these on the vulnerabilities and strengths that you know that your employees have. And it's not about finger pointing. It's not about, you know, sort of identifying employees and saying, you know, person X has got these vulnerabilities, so therefore we need to sort this out. It's about helping people. It's about helping people at the individual and organizational level. Remember that there are situations where hard constraints should be implemented, and in some cases, and I'm going to use this word, it's on the slide, enforced. Going back to my example earlier on, most of us, all of us, I hope, would wear a seatbelt when driving a car. Most of us will wear a helmet when riding a bike. Not everybody does. Most of us will use protective clothing when we're working in hazardous environments. But sometimes this doesn't happen. And I'm going to give a very quick example. I do all of those things apart from the last one. About a year ago, I was doing some DIY reconstruction work on my house, and for 10 minutes I was working under time pressure. I took off some protective boots. I put on some running trainers to do something that was more comfortable to do in running trainers, and I had a 135-kilo wall fall on my foot, and I broke my foot in 15 places. Would I ever do that again? No. So why should it be different in the cyber world? Maladaptive behaviors can still occur due to things like pressures on cognition and time. So allowing some flexibility to hard constraints can be very risky. I'm not saying that we need to have hard constraints in place all the time, but I'm saying in some situations, hard constraints like blocking people from doing certain things at certain times, or at least making it a bit harder to do so that we invest more cognitive effort into doing it in the first place, can be a really good thing. And I'm happy to talk more about that later on. Design human-centric cybersecurity communications for all, CISO, security teams, and individuals. And then finally, we're partly here today to talk about the OutThink framework for management of human risk. It's a brilliant framework. It's informed by the evolution of human-centered cybersecurity research with insights from academia and industry. This really is a key initiative to help with the above and more. And I hope that lots of people on the call today will want to be involved in this work. So thanks all for listening, and I'll hand back over to Shawful.
Thank you, Phil. Okay, so just quickly moving on again for the interest of time, over to Paul. Paul is our CISO from Bunzl, also head of security. So Paul, just a quick question before you go into it. What has been the biggest challenge you have faced when engaging with staff? What are some of the practical issues? If you could talk us through those.
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go for it, Paul.
Yeah, so hello everyone. Thank you very much for making this time. Staying with us, we really appreciate it. I hope this webinar will give you some ideas or maybe call for action from our distinguished guests. So I'm group head of information security at Bunzl. It's a distribution group operating in many countries, primarily in B2B space. We supply non-food products, face masks to reusable cups, and the headquarters is in London, and I'm based in London too. Next slide, please. So Oh, okay, sorry, a bit early. Okay, so let me discuss, let me talk about myself. So I've been in the industry for a couple of years now. I work in different countries, different companies. In Banzai, I've been for 7 months now. And as a new CISO, I understand engaging people across the business is very key to success of my strategy. So by people, I mean culture. And by culture, we try to measure people's sentiments, attitudes, beliefs, and perceptions, which in turn drive behaviors. So we cannot change something if we don't understand it. And ideally, if we want people in business and maybe beyond at their homes, becomes unconscious competent in engaging safe behaviors. So they're doing it without thinking. So the next slide, let's talk about challenges. Yeah, so the main challenges for me. So I'll discuss just the 3 ones, the top ones. First of all, it's important to get it right the first time. As you know, the first impression sticks, and security awareness program by default has a very high visibility and impact. I want to build trust and credibility from the start. So to get it right, we need experts to run, and we need the right technology to support them. There are many security awareness solutions on the market, some of them free, and all of them, and any of them can tick the compliance box. But I want to go beyond security awareness. And that's where we come to the second challenge. So we need to measure current state and quantify the human risk on a daily, on continuous basis. And every CISO has a challenge, limited resource, and we have limited people and budgets. So we need to make sure the team is efficient and we're really managing the top risk in organization. So the next challenge, we also need to demonstrate the return on investment to the board, to execs. And that is why measurements are very important. Legacy metrics such as knowledge test, efficient click rate, clear desk inspections, they're often misleading, and they're doing probably more harm than good. So we need to know how do people feel about security, what is their attitudes, perceptions instead. So to run a successful program, this is very important all the time to know who is not behaving securely and why they're not doing it. So we can provide timely support and interventions to put the right processes and technologies in place. So the example I want to give you is from one of previous companies I worked for, without mentioning the name. So it was a global business. It operates in decentralized model. One of the problems we identified was a number of employees using personal cloud storage for work-related activities. We were worried, so there are possible human errors and the actual security of those cloud platforms, and also related data leakage issues. So, but using the data, we were able to segment this group and approach those users and try to understand their challenges. And it quickly became apparent that they're doing it, so they just transferred large files with third parties. They didn't know another way around. So from my perspective, if we give them more entertaining, nano security videos and trainings, that would have made little difference at this stage. So once we understood the problem, we quantified, we quickly came up with a solution. We introduced secure file sharing platform. We ran a pilot with those users, and most of them stopped using it. The personal cloud storage solution. So the point I'm making is that measuring and understanding human risk is a very important first step in delivering security that works for the organization and employees and not against them. In an ideal world, CISO or security leaders in the company would do it by engaging users, meeting them in person, one-to-one, but it's not scalable if you're talking about hundreds or more people in the company. So only data can help to with this, to collect and analyze at scale. So we need the right technology to help us here. So Yeah, so the next slide. Yeah, there are many other challenges as well, so, but the top three I mentioned. So the next slide, please. Yeah, so I would like to thank you everyone for the efforts we're making in this space. And I urge the industry to think beyond security awareness training and try to understand people motives, the reasons why, the ability to exercise their secure behavior and prompt them to do the right things. It would be great to have a playbook, such as, you know, the CyberNIST, ISAF, ISO, similar to like playbook or framework for the management of human risk and cybersecurity. That would help practitioners like myself, indeed, to be more efficient when dealing with human risk and ultimately make our society more secure and resilient to emerging threats. And please do engage with the team to participate in this initiative. Yeah, yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. That was really informative and interesting to know what happens in the real world. Okay, so before we go on to questions, it might be good to review what the results of our poll was. So could we display those results at the moment? Okay, so yeah, so people think that if we was to actively manage human risk, we could reduce it to between 30 and 50%. Wow, from the current 90%. Actually, someone asked a question of where did we get the 90% from? It's actually from the ICO. So the ICO reports the number of breaches and what they're related to. And so the ICO reported 90%. I think it's 90.5% were due to human error. Okay, the next question, if you could just scroll down a bit. So what's the current allocation of budget? Okay, so at the moment, it's a split between less than 5% and between 5 and 25%. So, you know, almost 80, 90%, 85%, what's that? Sorry, 88% of people below that the current investment is below 25% on the people parts of managing human risk or managing risk security, sorry. So on people, process and technology, it looks like people believe that most people believe it's below 25%, with about half, 46%, believing it's less than 5%. The ideal split, interesting, people want to see it, half of people want to see it between 25 and 50%. So, you know, probably about a third. A third of people want to see it between 5 and 25%. So interesting, a big shift from the less than 5%. Only 2% of people would like to still see it at less than 5%, with most people moving up to between 25 and 50%. Well, it's interesting finding, again, if anybody wants to know more, please do speak to us. So we've actually got quite a few questions coming through, so I hope our guests are ready to answer them. But actually, I've just got a couple first, one for each actually guest, before we get started on what our attendees have asked. So Angela, you talk about fitting, obviously, the task of people in for your presentation, but one of the things I'd be interested to understand is, what skills do security practitioners need to develop to deliver more human-centric security approach?
So there is a package that colleagues from Cranfield University had developed called Security Dialogues. And that's basically focusing on this, like, you know, we need to really listen to and listen to employees, and then find out, you know, work with them in order to find, you know, effective and efficient solutions. And they basically, in that package, if I remember correctly, it was first of all, it's like that you actually need to learn how to appear approachable. The second is you need to learn how to listen. And then basically skills of how you actually communicate, negotiate, you know, those really, and then of course, like marketing, I suppose, would be another part of that. So that if anybody's interested, if you Google for security dialogues, you'll be able to find, you'll find that. I think that's a good start in terms of like skills that each individual security professional who really wants to work with their staff can develop.
Okay, thank you. Phil, so you mentioned sort of implementing hard constraints, and you gave the example of sort of a car and motorbike, how we'd wear seatbelts and helmets. Can you give me an example when it's appropriate to use hard constraints? So, if as a security practitioner, when would it be appropriate without making people feel as though they're being controlled?
Sure. I think there are lots of examples that could be given, but I'll give you just two. The first example, and I don't want to dwell on emails, but I'll give you an email example to begin with. I mean, how many of us, there's not going to be a show of hands or a poll on this, but how many of us have accidentally CC'd somebody into an email that we didn't want to CC into the email, we've sent it? That can be quite innocent at times, but at other times it can be quite, it can be really, really bad if you're sharing a sensitive document or something that you don't want somebody to see, and you've just looked up somebody's name because you're mentioning them in the email, and then you end up CCing them in. So a hard constraint there could be, that you really have to check and verify that the people you're CCing into the email are people that you want to CC in before you send the email. And then another example, and this goes back to research that I've been involved in over the last 15 to 20 years, is there is so much hard evidence out there from cognitive science that if we make some information within interfaces just a little bit more difficult to access, so just a couple of seconds to uncover that information in order to view it and work with it. And then when we move away from that uncovering, the information is maybe masked again. We have a powerful shift in cognition such that we move towards a very, very cognitively intensive processing strategy. And we start to brush off some of these automatic processing strategies that can sometimes cause us to process information in a very piecemeal fashion and make mistakes. So some hard constraints can have a really powerful effect on cognition and start lifting our protective mechanisms. So that's just two examples.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Paul, you mentioned sort of showing a return on investment in security. In your experience, what's been the biggest challenge in demonstrating that return on investment? Because obviously from security, you don't make money. So how do you demonstrate that return on investment?
Yes, good question. It is difficult exercise. It's a bit easier in a mature organization where we have robust risk management framework and assessment on continuous basis. But the less mature organization is difficult. It's the standard formula for return on security investment. You need to know the cost of solution. You need to know the single loss expectancy and the actual impact of the solution, right? And that's exactly the challenge. In order to understand what's the efficiency of the solution, like security awareness and in the culture program, you need to know the baseline and you need to know the effect that this program having. So that's why it's very important. I mentioned before that you need to have the right metrics at the beginning to measure the baseline and on an ongoing basis. So we're talking about attitudes, people attitudes towards security program, their motivations, doing the right thing, etc. And there are some solutions which helps here. But it's difficult. You need statistical data and the right solution to support you. Okay.
Well, thank you very much. Okay, so we'll go to some of the questions that the panelists have asked. So I'm just going to pick a group of few of them. Okay. So someone's asked that, Phil mentioned that you need to set a baseline for people's security is an important step. Phil, how can this be done? How can you set a baseline for this area?
So I was just typing a response to that question. I'd say great minds, Shawful. So some people would think that establishing a baseline is very difficult. How can you know your workforce so well that you're able to establish what the cyber strengths, vulnerabilities, and behaviours are? I mean, one way to do that is to think about adopting some of the frameworks that are already developed and being developed. And these frameworks often consist of things like, very easy to implement questionnaires. Questionnaires are asking people not just about things like risk-taking behavior, impulsivity, those kind of things, but actually asking people about things like their affinity to their technology and their organization, their organizational commitment, what motivates them, what drives them, and these kind of things. So very much looking at individual differences, characteristics, personality characteristics, and so on. So you can start building sort of persona profiles. So not individual profiles. We don't want, you know, people to be identified, as I said, pointing fingers, but persona profiles of what people, maybe 5, 6 different types of people, look like in your organization. And then you can begin to tackle things through those personas.
Thank you, Phil. And just have a look at another question.
Can I add something to that?
Yes,
I mean,
please do, Angela.
if you're willing to invest a bit more, you can also, of course, you know, it's again, it's like what's appropriate to your organization. In my work, for instance, I've been always like surprised in how many organizations tailgating still is a huge issue, right? And if that's really a concern of yours, then we've measured behavior by basically sampling. So by doing observations, say, you know, on you know, every Wednesday for a month, and then after the introduction of the measures, you know, done that again. In other organizations, we've just collected the data from CCTV recordings, you know, to look at. So again, you can do other things. You can crawl and see how many documents that are only supposed to be in an access controlled repository you can find out there on the infrastructure, and repeat that again. So if you just, you know, basically, I think you once you focus on what is it you're actually trying to you know, what's the behavior you want and what is it you're trying to prevent, you can find measures for to do that kind of, you know, to get really meaningful measures and hard measures of behavior collected from observational data.
Thank you, Angela. I mean, again, if anybody else would like to know more about how to measure baseline and stuff, I mean, please do get in touch with us and speak to us. I mean, part of building this framework is to include some of this knowledge and experience to be able to get people to start on the journey to being human-centered security.
Another thing you can do is you can, if you have a social network, you know, like an internal social network like Yammer, you know, you can run a sentiment analysis on what people say in connection with security, you know, or with specific security measures. All sorts of, you know, it's really a lot you can measure. It's not just about sending out questionnaires, which often have the drawback that people suffer from survey fatigue and, you know, not really, you know, just trying to get them done as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Angela. Okay, just a question around people. Someone's asked, in their opinion, people are the solution, not the problem. But how do you get the executive of the organization to believe that? Question for you, Paul. So how would you get your senior board to believe that people are the solution, not the problem? How do you go about convincing them?
People are the solution. Well, you know, you mentioned the stats earlier, right? So 90% or, you know, 70-90% different, it's all related to human side of things, right? The data breaches. So, you know, you can show the hard facts about it and try to, you know, to show that you engage in people when you developing a program, developing a solution. So I mentioned in the first slide, it should be people-centric security, not the other way around. So we need to take into consideration security culture of the company and understand people to make, you know, targeted interventions.
Thank you, Paul. And also, Angela, just same question to you. I mean, you've obviously spoken with organizations and senior leadership. How do you get them to believe, I guess, or take on board that, you know, people can be the solution and are not the problem or the weakest link?
Often by discussing some of their own behaviors with them. And you know, I mean, sort of like if you talk to board members about, you know, quite a few of them are doing things they shouldn't be doing, and if you then show that by, you know, finding a better solution, plus then saying, you know, but now you need to, you know, we now made it easy for you to do the right thing. Now we need you to change your behavior, you know, and work through that period until this new habits become automatic, the new secure habits become automatic and safe to do. I think it's really, really important also to point out to them that, you know, leadership serving as a role model for secure behaviors is absolutely crucial, you know, in the organization, because if you can keep telling people that something is important, if the people at the top aren't doing it, then it's just not going to be believed, you know. And so and I, in my experience, once you actually show them that it's not just about you've now changed your behavior and you've helped to secure the organization, but you are helping to bring everybody, you know, you have a big role in bringing everybody else along, then, you know, actually, we in the ENISA report I co-authored with a couple of colleagues on it was, I think it was called behavior research in cybersecurity in organizations. One of the key things we actually found in there is that actually there's one factor that is more important in changing behavior than anything else. It's in fact the only thing that's been found in 1,500, 1,600 studies in a meta-analysis to actually really make a difference. And that is, psychologists call it self-efficacy. So it's whether you actually think you can do this new behavior that's expected of you, right? And I think that the fear of not being able to do it is actually, with more senior people, even bigger than it is with the ordinary employee out there. So it's actually really, really key to actually show, you know, for them to experience that they can do it. And then, you know, in my experience is, once people do and have shifted to the secure behavior, then actually they're really happy about it, you know, because if they're not following the rules, most people aren't, you know, they go like, yay, great, you know, I'm not following the rules, but they have constantly this constant nagging worry at the back of, you know, the back of their mind. And then when you actually feel you can do it, you know, if you have the confidence, you can do it, and then you experience it, it's actually huge relief. And that's one of those ways of actually shifting, you know, to a positive experience of security and getting towards what we call, you know, what we would ultimately call empowerment. And that's really, really important to really build our employees into an equal partner in this task.
Okay, well, thank you. A question to you, Phil. How would you handle sort of outlier human sort of behavior related to cybersecurity? So something like, you know, a disgruntled employee or someone who's trying to sabotage or something. How would you handle that? Or how would you measure, I guess, and identify and then handle it?
So one of the questions in the chat room, which I think is good. There's so many really good questions there. Thanks to everybody. One of the questions is, you know, how do we, related to that, is how do we quantify these things? How do we measure things? How do we go about it? Sometimes I take it for granted, like I guess others on the panel, that, you know, we use lots of different techniques, models, human factors models, statistical models, and so on. So we can quite easily, through a data set, identify what some people would call an outlier. I never really like using the term outlier. I always like to think of an outlier as a special case, somebody who's of great interest. You know, for one end of the scale, it could be because somebody is performing so well that they're very, very different to other people, or they're not performing so well, possibly because they've fallen asleep when you were collecting the data, maybe, who knows. But what you can do is, you know, you can identify these sort of special cases, if you like. And if you're conducting a study where participants, you know, sometimes this is rare, can be identified, then you can try and work, I guess, with that individual to try and work out what the problems are and try and find solutions to them. However, sometimes we face situations where, you know, we have to be careful about the data we collect in terms of ethics and risk assessments and so on. So quite often data we collect will be anonymized and will be confidential. So we'll often be in a situation where even when we detect an outlier, it's very, very difficult to work out who that person is. And in some respects, organizations, you know, if you're working with an organization HR department, they won't want you to be able to detect that person because it could result in all sorts of HR legal issues and so on. So if you can identify a person and they're willing to learn more, be educated and understand more, then that's great, but sometimes you can't.
Okay, thank you very much. We are running out of time. So just one final question and a sort of short answer from all of you. It's very relevant now, I guess. With the lockdown, you know, a lot of people are working from home. How does this complicate sort of cybersecurity risk? So Paul, just a quick sort of statement how this has become complicated for you?
Yeah, so the risk surface increases, right? So before, most of the employees were locked in their offices and and work locations. Now it's the other way around. It's more kind of home locations, where you don't have much control over, right? So that's why it's important to make sure their home environment is secure enough and up to the risk appetite of the organization, the standards of the organization. So yeah, you need to have technology, remote technology to support it, such as multi-factor authentication for VPNs, and I don't know, maybe cloud-based proxies, those kind of solutions, which allow you, for example, VPN split tunnel, if you go into details. But yeah, the surface is much wider now.
Okay, thank you. Angela, what's your sort of statement around people working from home? What kind of risk do they pose now?
I think it's the social engineering surface is just increased massively because first of all, it's you're not in your existing structures anymore, and so somebody phoning up and saying like oh, I'm from the other office, or I can't get in there now because of the situation. All of that is very very plausible pretexting, down to the fact that I think a lot of people are working more, not less, and we know that if people are overworked, they're less likely to actually focus, to take to do the stop and take some time to think about things apart. I think also the distraction, I see it a lot with that several of them are trying to manage their children at the same time and so on, and that actually really means that a skilled social engineering attacker who just goes in there and is plausible and pushes the right button, I think it's very, very hard, because we've done a lousy job of preparing people against social engineering. It's this obsession with phishing and clicking on phishing messages, when actually what we need them to do is to be able to recognize, when that somebody's trying to manipulate you, and giving them the skills of how you counter, that. And these are like little things that can be done in role-playing exercises, sometimes 15-minute, 20-minute sessions, but just people need to actually be able to see. Also in companies previously, we used to do those kind of, but not enough companies do it. You basically record attackers on the phone trying to manipulate an employee, and so all the other employees can actually hear it, or see it, and then you discuss how to do it. Those are really enabling things, and I think most of the employees we've now sent home to work from home, and they have no, they have no idea about the type of attack, never mind about how you actually effectively defend against it.
Yeah, thank you, Angela. And Phil, a short statement from you, please, and then we can move on.
Well, I think, this situation, there are so many negative sides to the current situation in the world, obviously, and working from home should be a positive. There might be a paradigm shift, there might very well be a paradigm shift towards more people working from home more often. But as the others have said, there are huge cyber risks that we need to better understand. And I think the only way we can better understand them is through joining up and doing some research to understand it, particularly in the areas like looking at maladaptive behaviour. So when I was talking earlier on about, even with the best cybersecurity knowledge, understanding, awareness in the world, when, like Angela, just mentioned, you're working at home and then suddenly you've got, I'll give the personal example, 2 children at home being homeschooled, and they're asking you to support them with a piece of homework and these kind of things, and you've got to send that email. You're going for that £1 million grant, you've got to send the email, and then, as I said, you CC in the wrong person and so on. So we really need to understand more about maladaptive behaviours and how they can manifest themselves, so that we can develop processes, systems and techniques that can better protect people, so that hopefully we can all work from home a bit more in the future.
Thank you very much, Phil. Okay, thank you. Thank you to all my guests, and also for your valuable insights. It's been very useful. And also thank you to all of you who've attended. Hope the past hours help you understand the importance of human-centered security. So as I mentioned at the beginning, at OutThink, we're partnering with CISO, security practitioners and academics to create a framework for human-centered security. And this will form the basis for a playbook, which we want to create to help the industry with some basic and fundamental knowledge to get started in human-centered security. So if you work in or are involved in cybersecurity and would like to get involved more involved, then please do contact us. The details are on the screen, so do reach out to us. Also go to our website to find out more. And also, we're happy to discuss any of the questions. We try to answer as many questions as we can, but obviously run out of time. But if there are any more questions, please do reach out to us through our email. And once again, thank you to my guests and to everyone who logged in. It's been a very pleasurable hour. Thank you very much. And have a nice day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.